articles and shows like PAX and things like that. So yeah, it just kept kind of spiraling outwards. And then when the game actually launched, we launched with multiplayer online. Well, I say we launched with multiplayer. We launched and we said we had multiplayer. It was pretty terrible and like completely dysfunctional. So we like rushed for the next couple months to make it actually work. And then we had from our first summer sale, so the game came out in March, and then a few months later, our first summer sale did pretty well. Not amazing, but decently well. We were able to hire a programmer to help us with all the stuff that we were kind of backlogged on. And um, we paid the programmer twice what we were earning because we were just like, we paid them the absolute minimum they would take, which was lowering their salary from the previous job they came from, and was double what we were earning as founders. And then we we continued making those updates. And from there, it started taking off, not taking off, but it started growing slowly. And over the course of probably a year and a half, by the time we saw our summer sale over a year after launch, that's when we were like, okay, this thing's actually working. And then the next winter sale was bigger, and then the next summer sale was bigger. But our best year actually in sales was 2020 so far, um, which is crazy for a game that launched in 2016. Now, maybe that's pandemic related. But it's also just kind of grown in popularity, and maybe it's plateauing at this point. I think it probably is, but yeah, that's how we've been. I mean, in how we've been able to continue keeping it up is really just the sales have been good, and we never shot too far ahead. We were always one update ahead. We're like, hey, these are the cool updates we could do in the next 6 months. We were never like, we're going to do this massive thing that changes the entire game and it's going to take us 2 years and 8 more people. It was like, well, if we hire one artist, they should be able to do these things. Like we should be able to do these things with this artist's help in 6 months. So that's where we're setting our sights.
Right. There's so much
Yeah.
good stuff in there. Thank you for that detail and that background. Really cool. Just to confirm, it sounds like you've never taken any kind of outside investment, no publisher investments, anything of that nature.
Yeah. So there was just the one investment that was from kind of family friends put in a bunch of family friends put in a little bit of money.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I mean, first of all, should acknowledge the fact that most people don't have that ability. Most people don't
Yeah.
have family and friends who can just throw like 10K or 15K at a time into anything. So we're very fortunate for that. And were it not for that, we would have survived to launch because we had other privileges. Like I was still living at home. One of our other founders was still living at home. Um, so there were lots of things where it's like didn't like no kids, no car, no expensive rent to pay.
Right.
And at age, I don't know what it was, 24 or whatever it is, like that's pretty unusual, or at least pretty lucky. So yeah, so then the family friends investment was a royalty based investment in the game. So they invested in the game and they got money back based on our sales. They got royalties. And then once they got paid back, I think it was once they got double their money, then the percentage changed, and then once they got, I think, 4 times their money, they were basically done.
Mm-hmm.
So, so that was cool for them. It was a good bet for them. Was it a smart investment? I don't really know, but they did it probably because it was, friends and family and all that.
Yeah.
But
So,
yeah,
so since then, it's been pretty much bootstrapped, right? It sounds like you've continued to kind of work on the game and only grow when you can do so sustainably. So I do like, and I really appreciate that. I do like the idea of, you talked about hiring one person instead of necessarily 8, right? Because one person's was what you can afford, right? And then you didn't hire 8, and then sprint 6 months to then what could have been less of a success. That then asks you to lay off 7 of those people, right? So, really, really cool to kind of hear that bootstrap story, especially when like you said, it is kind of built off of privilege, but a lot of us, absolutely believe that outside funding or a publisher deal is absolutely necessary, to move forward in the space. So great to see
for
another
sure,
example.
for sure. And I actually think one, like, to add to that, not growing the team too quickly, even when we could afford it. So Ultimate Chicken Wars has sold quite well. Even when we could afford it, there's there's affording it in terms of the bank account and like the financials, and there's affording it in terms of, well, maybe it's not affording it, but where do your skills lie? Like, am I and my other co-founders at the time, are we good managers? Like, did we train in that? Do we have a lot of experience in that? Are we are we able to manage 8 people on a complicated project? Um, Certainly at the time, no. And now, there's a little more experience, but I think the focus has always been on staying small so that we can stay within our skills and not get too ahead of ourselves. I think what some companies tend to do when they have a big success financially is they they immediately set their sights to bigger. It's like, hey, what's the bigger and better thing? This next project's going to be 15 people and twice the budget, and this next project after that's going to be 30 people and this much. And I just don't like. I understand why some people have that drive, but I would rather grow in a way that is um, like the a kind of metaphor I've used, which is not great and could use help, but anyway, working on it, is kind of like a tree. Instead of the tree branching out further and further and further from its trunk, it's like the leaves are just growing denser and thicker inside. So
Yeah,
you're like fostering those connections between the people, and you're making better processes internally. You're creating better quality things, but you don't necessarily have to spread yourself out so much. So that's kind of our has been our mentality.
that metaphor works. I'm in. Um, I I bet the audience here really also appreciates the self-awareness of what it takes to be a good manager, right? And I think a lot of us in the indie space are getting into, and we're starting, studios. It's a bunch of friends, plus a couple of people that got into it to make games, to create art, and then if we're lucky, we have a success, right? And then suddenly, it's not just creating a game; it's you have a company and you have an employee, you have employees, right? And then you actually have to think about what it means to be a good employer. And um, hopefully, that stuff is solved up front, but oftentimes it's not. And then it's really hard to solve for that when you're just in the middle of, operating and running your business and supporting your games. So that is also another thing that, we're here to try to support. So, helping people, helping teams kind of transition from a a bunch of friends, that are creating games to actually being good employers and good managers, and thinking about people and talent development and their career paths and doing the right things for them, et cetera, et cetera.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're just not turning our gaze on, you know, doing that by becoming bigger. It's more doing that by becoming more professional and better at what we do,
Hmm.
and growing slightly, adding a person or two, but not, uh, you know, 25.
Right, right. Let's. I know you had a couple things that you wanted to talk about, and before we get into the deluge of questions that are going to come from the community, I wanted to give you the floor to touch on those topics. So you mentioned wanting to touch on cover letters and diversity and inclusion. Where would you like to start?
Could start with some cover letter stuff. It's been interesting to, well, I guess I'm very open to questions about either of those things. But also, I guess on the cover letter side, it's interesting to see to watch myself read through cover letters. And depending on how the application is done, like this current round, we went through Typeform, which is basically like a Google form but fancier, and there was room for people to write their cover letter in a certain box, or they could attach a PDF of their cover letter. And so what we noticed is some people wrote in the box and they wrote, a small paragraph, and other people attached a cover letter that was a full page of size 10 font. Um, so I realized, I mean, we're learning little things about our hiring practices as we go. That was one of those things that it's not really clear. Like, do you actually dock points from someone for only writing one paragraph? Well, not really, because that's what they assumed you wanted, probably. Um, but in general, I think for cover letters, some of the things I've noticed the most are um, people people will sometimes go on about how amazing our studio is and our game is and all this stuff, and not talk about how they could bring something useful to the studio. So they'll, they mention some of their experience and things like that. But what I'd really like to know as a person reading through this and hiring is like, okay, I appreciate that you like our studio, but why do you think that your skills or your personality or your whatever fit in with our studio? And I find sometimes there's a missing link. The ideal thing is that someone would take their experience or their volunteer or professional and then tie that in and say, well, when I was working at this place or when I was volunteering on this project, I learned this and this, and I think that's a really useful skill for a studio of your size because this, that kind of thing. Um,
Yeah, I think we see a lot in cover letters like extolling the virtues and the passion for games, the industry overall, and then passion for your games, right? And that's nice, but that's a fan letter, right?
mhm.
It's not necessarily useful in evaluating whether or not somebody is going to be the right fit for this company or role. So helping helping the hire manager kind of bridge that gap and including information, including stories, including evidence that is going to kind of back up that assumption, right? That's what we're looking for, Richard, when we're looking at cover letters. Like, is this individual, do they have the potential to be a right fit for this role? And then thus, do I then want to engage in a conversation with them? Those are the type of things that we're really looking for.
And I think it's your cover letter to me at least, and I'm not, I don't have a ton of experience in this. We've just hired the people we've hired, but to me, the cover letter is kind of explain your CV in a way that's more useful than just listing out what was on the CV, and then tell me why you think the company is interesting. So one of the things for us that we've liked is, we put quite a lot of effort into the diversity and inclusion stuff and trying to help marginalized developers in the industry. And, we're certainly not perfect at it, but we're making a lot of effort. If someone sees that we're doing that and puts in the cover letter, I really appreciate the fact that you're doing this and this is important to me because this, that is a big plus to me because it's like, okay, you actually are looking at the stuff that we care about doing as opposed to saying something like, I play Ultimate Chicken Horse all the time with my friends, and I'd love to work for your studio. It's like, well, I don't really see the link. Like, you could play lots of games and not want to work for their studios. Um, so that's, I think, a pretty important thing
Yeah,
there.
they might think that they want to work for your studio, right? Just based upon you make good games that great games that I love. But again, that doesn't necessarily say that they've done any research into what it's like to work there and what your culture is, even though you've outwardly stated that, on your job descriptions, on your website, etc. So that's what you're really interested in is does that really vibe with you? Is that work environment, something that is going to be interesting to you, is going to be supportive, of you, and are you paying attention to all the effort and work that we're actually putting into describing all of this and calling it out? Because we're doing it to try to capture your intention. Let us know if we're successful, and also let us know that you're truly actually paying attention, that you're interested, right?
Yeah, or even, I mean, I think someone, not in this hiring round, but I think in the previous round, someone even put in their cover letter, like, I see this effort that you're trying to make, and I think you're doing a good job, but like, I think you can do better and I can help you do better. And so that comes off as very confident, which I personally like a lot. But it's not like you don't know what you're doing, let me help. It's like I see and appreciate what you're doing, but I think I can bring my skills to the table and I can help you to be better at this thing that you're doing. And that kind of can be applied to all of the like just your general skills as well as an artist, a programmer, a manager, whoever it is. A friend who runs another studio was talking to me at some point about this kind of thing and was saying like they were kind of heated in talking about this because they had read through a whole bunch of cover letters that kept saying the same thing about how amazing their studio is. And he's like, I don't care how amazing our studio is. Tell me why you are a superstar. Tell me why
Yeah.
you
Why are
should
you
work here,
amazing? Yeah.
And I do think there is definitely a fine line, and I don't really know how to navigate this. But there is a fine line like between confidence and cockiness. Like there was one cover letter I read um, that said basically like I'm amazing at this, I'm exceptional at this, and just many times was like I've made the best this, I've made the best this, and there's something about that that was kind of turning me off. It was like, this is a little bit, seems like too much. But in the same time, I don't want to encourage people to come across as, I'm not very good at this, but da da da, right? So it's like a
Right.
healthy amount of confidence. Um, but yeah, that's why I'm saying I don't really know exactly
Yeah.
how to dance that line. But
I would say, I mean, one, just being honest, right? You're probably not the best at all of those things. So being honest and having some humility, certainly confidence, right? Like is certainly important. That's what you want to present with your kind of stories and your results. But overconfidence or I think what strikes me about that story, Rich, is that sounds like somebody who might not be open to feedback, right? Might not be coachable.
mhm,
Um, Somebody who thinks that they don't suffer from imposter syndrome at all, right? And as a result, they think that they might be done, right? They might be done learning. And look, I've been in business for 20 plus years now. I think I'm pretty good at a few things, but even I have a lot to learn in even just my core competencies, right? So we want to see people are that are confident that they could do great work, right? But are also still open to and eager to continue to improve.
mhm.
Okay, so live chat. I don't see any cover letter questions yet. If you guys want to drop some in, feel free to do so. Let's jump into diversity and inclusion. Drop in those questions as well. And then there are a couple questions there, and we'll get to those after we cover the DNI topic. I've got a couple questions on DNI, but is there somewhere that you wanted to start? And are there certain things that you wanted to make sure were said today?
No, I think you can. I think you can start, and we can try and get to. I'll say whatever I can about the topic. We're still trying to figure it out, um, but yeah, happy to hear your questions and go from there.
Right. Just like what we were just talking about, Rich, you just gave us an example, right? Which is, Rich, I think you're raising the bar on kind of diversity and inclusion in indie games and hiring. And, but at the same time, Rich just said, we're still figuring out, right? Rich is acknowledging that there's still a lot to learn, a long way to go. So one question I had thinking about this, so you do put a lot of thought into writing your job descriptions, making them inclusive, and creating a very accessible application process. Um, by definition, this will lead to a lot more applications than you would receive otherwise. And we see a lot of complaints from other indie studios about too many applications and not being able to manage them. So just starting there, by being a small indie studio, how do you actually manage the volume when you're opening yourself up to maybe a 5 to 10x number of applicants?
Yeah, good question. So this round, we were hoping to actually work with an external HR company to help us kind of sort through the big pile of applicants and give us, not give us top two, but give us like a top 15 or something. It didn't end up working out because of scheduling and they were busy and holidays and stuff, but that was the goal. So that didn't happen. So the answer is time. Um, so our newest hire, Elizabeth, has been doing a lot of this HR stuff. I mean, she's the operations manager and is taking care of, well, we'll be kind of splitting HR duties, but she's taking care of operations and so she's been doing a lot of this. And then yeah, it's kind of like first pass of sorting. One of the things we did was on our type form, the form you have to fill out when applying, we do ask, are you legally allowed to work in Canada? And, we're not, it's not that we're completely closed to sponsoring a visa for someone, but if we can do it in Canada, it's a lot easier. Um, just because we don't have to, I mean, there's the whole visa and the legal side of things, but then there's also the justification to the Quebec government, where depending on the title, and I don't know this exactly, but from what I know and have heard from others, it's that you have to justify why you're hiring someone out of province and then why you're hiring someone out of the country. So it's like, show me that you've looked at every single programmer at this level in the country, and then we can justify hiring the one from Egypt. And
Right.
so it's a lot easier. So that's a first pass. And if we have enough good candidates that are, yes, I can legally work in Canada, That's kind of where one of the first passes. And then there's, yeah, I mean, then it's just a matter of time. Like we got over 75 applicants so far for this job and closes tomorrow. And some of them are kind of throwaway. They're like people who clearly didn't put any effort into the cover letter, don't have any experience in this field, um, seemed like they were just like clicked apply and did the least amount of work possible. So those are not obviously people that we're considering, but yeah, there's still quite a lot of good candidates. So I don't know, but
Yeah.
I do think that opening us up, writing a job description such that it opens us up to more candidates, like I'd rather go that direction and then work with an external team that can help us whittle it down, as opposed to, I mean, the opposite, which is writing a job description that looks for a very specific kind of person, uh, and then closes us off to a more diverse pool of applicants.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, my
So
my opinion there is, if we're hiring managers, if we're hiring that, it's our job, right?
yeah, exactly.
It's our job to do that work. Yes, it's a lot of work, but if we can't do it, then we probably shouldn't be hiring. Touching on that, I've got a question that also kind of leads into Fifth Man's questions here. But as a follow up, when you're open to marginalized developers, understanding that they are, on average, that they've been given fewer opportunities and they're less likely to have a lot of experience, how do you actually evaluate those folks against other applicants that may have years of experience and multiple ship games? So if you got 75 applications now, you want to truly be inclusive and open to all. You may have some that have a ton of experience, others that have little experience. How are you actually going to, what's your process of actually giving those individuals with less experience as much of an opportunity as those with more? Fifth Man, kind of asked related to the cover letter is, how do I actually address the issue of lack of experience in my cover letter? Since most job postings ask for X number of years of experience for entry level roles, that they're not able to achieve.
For sure, it's a great question. I saw that and also added a little emoji to it. Um, so there's kind of two parts to it. One, I guess I'll address the cover letter part first, is to play up the things that you've done that are either hobbyist work or volunteer work or anything that's um, outside of professional experience. So if you've worked on a project with people, again, depends on the kind of job we're like job title that we're talking about, but if you've worked on a project with people and the project was complex and involved different obstacles, it doesn't really matter if it's, or it doesn't matter as much if it's games or if it's something else. Like I know you've worked with a team on something that was complex and there was internal conflict and you had to manage it. So in the same way that you would say, well, we're working on this game and it got cut last minute and then everyone's morale was terrible and we had to figure this out. Well, you can say the same thing about your, you know, uh, community garden that was being built and then the city shut it down last second and then you had to like it's the same kind of experience that I'm looking for from those things. Similarly, if it's like hobbyist projects, you can, if it's something a little bit more technical, you can explain, well, I was, working on this thing myself, and because I was doing it myself, I had to learn this and this and this and this. Um, and to me, I don't really care if that comes from your personal project or from a work environment. That's kind of, that's the first thing. So I would say playing up the things that are volunteer experience or hobbyist experience in a way that is meaningful. Like, were you part of any sort of like club at school, or were you part of, did you do any projects that were complex in any level of school? It really doesn't matter. So um, yeah, it's playing those things up and explaining clearly what you learned from them and why you think that is valuable to your work in our company or in games in general. The second piece is more on the employer side, which is, what do we actually need? So like, do we need a game designer with 8 years of experience? No, I mean we don't. Like there's no game that we are designing that needs a designer of 8+ years of experience. Um, so part of it is, first of all, just kind of asking for what you need or what you think you need. The add-on to that is that the amount of time it'll take you to train somebody up to get them up to speed might be less than you think. So I think often we have this mentality, when I say we, I mean people hiring have this mentality of, well, they need to really hit the ground running. Like I need them to be in engine first week and I need them to be like pumping stuff out right away. And I guess in some cases that's true, but like, yeah, I guess I have a little bit of trouble with saying like, okay, we need 3 years experience instead of 2 years experience because that's how much quicker they're going to get into the game. And I don't know, in our experience at least, that has never played a big role. So yeah, I mean the to me the professional experience is really about, have you worked in an environment where, you're given tasks to do, a you've had a manager or someone who you've had some sort of conflict with, have you been able to resolve that conflict? Have you seen, the pipeline of a game, etc. But that doesn't mean that that has to all be professional. So yeah.
Right. Awesome. Um, okay, so now we have moved beyond the hiring process. We actually hired somebody. We hired a talented individual with potential that hasn't been given many opportunities in the past. Um, how do you actually set them up for support and for success at the company in their role? And if it helps, um, I'd love to even hear just a specific example with a previous hire that you made.
Yeah, so I mean, the most important thing for me is checking in, and we've tried to do this as much as possible and as well as possible. So there's just checking in quickly. We have pretty decent documentation about the company and its policies and how we work and how we do things. And we have our like vacation and sick day policy and our like parental leave policy and things like that all written out. So that's one thing, is giving people a little kind of booklet, I mean digital booklet, of, here's how we operate. And the other thing is, yeah, is definitely just checking in, you know, pretty much every day for the first few days, and then at the end of that week, and then at the end of the following week, and then every couple weeks moving forward. It hasn't always been the best. Like I've definitely done that poorly in cases of some hires, but that's the goal. And the other
Who's doing the
piece,
checking in, and how's that look? How's that happen? Is that like one on ones, or is that over Slack? What's that look like?
yeah, so that's been, I mean, typically it's been me before we hired Elizabeth. It's been me, and so it was check-ins. Yeah, depending, kind of the first few days would be on Discord, because presumably I've spent a bunch of time on video with them already. So the first few days will be, checking in later in the afternoon, like, okay, how are things going? Like, have you seen this? Have you seen this, etc. And we do video calls. The team does like a video check-in every day, so there's always room for that with a new hire, where I would probably hang on to them for a second and talk about what they were up to that day. We do leave a bit of space, like we'd like to give folks some documentation and say, okay, over the next few days, take some time to look at this, and like don't worry about getting yourself into any of the specific like production tasks
Yeah,
just yet. But yeah, they've been one-on-ones, and I think with Elizabeth, who's helping with HR, they're gonna help people. Well, they're gonna help do these check-ins as well. To be honest, I don't actually know how it's gonna work, because this is the first time with a new hire with them in the picture. So
right.
um, yeah.
What
The other thing, actually, sorry, quite importantly, the other piece of that is setting clear roles and responsibilities, and so making it clear what we expect the person to do, and having a clear list of like, here are the things that we expect you to do kind of right away. Here are the things that we will eventually give you to do, some months in, and just slowly introducing those over time.
Yeah,
That's always kind of been the goal.
I like that you have. It sounds like you have a very deliberate onboarding process, and you touched on earlier, like not necessarily hiring somebody that needs to be in game engine, in the first week. If they're in game engine in the first week, I might actually be a little bit concerned, right? Because that doesn't feel like you've created a lot of space for, onboarding, getting familiar with, company processes, even your games, etc. So,
Mhm.
you mentioned kind of these documents. Do you have a company handbook, and do you have like a version that you can share publicly?
We don't, because we kind of had one, and we ended up transferring our project management from Notion to something called ClickUp, and in the process, things got really messy. So that's actually something before this new hire starts, we have a big task to go through our onboarding stuff and make a proper document. But actually, it's a good thing to bring up because maybe we can share that kind of thing publicly once we once we clean it up.
Yeah, I would
But that
love
is, yeah,
to do so. I'd love to have more of those examples.
it's on the
Um,
to-do list.
all right, let's jump into some of the questions from the community here. So Lucky
Hmm.
Leaf
Mhm.
Gaming asks up front, awesome to see a Montreal studio. What would you say is the most prominent non-dev hobby in the office? And Catherine, do you want to take it from here?
Sure.
Okay. Good
So,
question. I it's so hard with remote work. There's been a lot less, we don't have the like hour of lunch every day with our team. So it's unfortunate to say we don't get into as much of the kind of hobby talk. Um, I think there's a pretty big interest in TV and movies from most people. I tend to not have any knowledge of either of those things. But that's a good question. I don't know. We've got folks who paint, do music stuff. Um, there's some folks interested more in like robotics and technology and math stuff. Um, yeah, some video games, although we're not a very gamery group, I would say. Like there's not a lot of people who play a ton of hours of games in the team. Um, yeah, I don't know. Good question. And actually, I think I don't know if I can just hop into some of these questions that are there, but I had a nice segue.
Go ahead.
Um,
yeah, go
so
ahead.
Ogre Teeth mentioned, what's your take on industry switching? Someone who has a lot of experience in another industry other than video games. The segue there was that because many of the people on our team don't come from games, it means that, um, yeah, it's just this is why we don't have like, or at least one of the reasons I would think we don't have a lot of like tons of hours of games played per week across the team. But my take on industry switching is fantastic. Yeah, I like we pretty much I'm trying to think over the years, we've had people come and go, but most of our employees have not come from games. And this designer position is a little bit different because we want somebody who knows more about games than we do is on the design side, someone who's studied game design ideally. Um, so that's a bit more of a specific hire, but yeah, certainly like our operations manager came from a film and theater background and writing and creative writing. Um, Someone we had previously who was doing some QA and production stuff came from like a neuroscience kind of background. Um, yeah, our artist had came from like film and animation. So yeah, it's a bit all over the place. And
That's
for me it came from engineering, music, and then engineering. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome. That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
that's amazing.
Diversity of perspectives, right? It's
Hmm.
if we all came from games and we have a very limited view of the world through our games lens, our breadth of knowledge is going to be limited to that. So I'm always also looking for building very complementary teams. So if you can bolt on somebody that has, Ogre Teeth, your outside perspective, and bring that new knowledge and perspective, and then share that within games and maybe even bring that into games and then allow us to see games in a very new way, like uh, that is a competitive advantage for you, right? Some developers might not always see it that way. Some might not appreciate it, but that's okay because that's not the developer, that's not the hiring manager that you then want to work for, right?
Hmm.
You want somebody that is going to really appreciate and value that diversity and unique perspective and unique knowledge that you're going to bring to the team.
Hmm.
All right. So, Sudden Rebel asks, I see on the job posting that the position will initially be remote and eventually transition to on site. Would you be open to applicants from outside of Canada and if they are willing to relocate when the time comes?
So yes, the the trickier part comes in the visa and like legally allowed to work. In terms of distance, someone in Vancouver coming to Montreal is like the same distance as Paris, or probably even more distance. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think we're open to it. The we're right now we're working in a kind of hybrid. Well, right now we're kind of fully back to lockdown, but generally we're working in a kind of hybrid model where ideally we have people who live somewhere around Montreal-ish, such that um, depending on how far they live, they could come in for like big team meetings, or they could come in for, a week where we could put them up in like an Airbnb and they could actually come in and work with us in the office for a while and have lunches with us and things like that to get to know the team better. So that's the ideal thing. If someone was in like, I don't know, Bangkok, it would be quite hard to do that. Whereas if someone's in Ottawa, it's like quite a bit easier. So we're open, but I do think it's harder to justify someone who is very far away. But again,
How
if
much
the applicant's awesome, yeah.
how much does a visa cost to process?
I don't actually know. I mean, the more complicated thing is the legal fee or the more expensive thing is like the legal
Yeah,
fees associated with that. Um, but I don't actually know. And the reality is that since there have been good enough candidates in Canada in the past, we haven't really had to look at it.
right.
And I'm like sorry if that sounds lazy,
No,
but it
that's
is,
perfectly fine.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's kind of how we've been.
I've heard like 5 to 10K Canadian from other studios, and like you said, you haven't had to look at it, yet. You likely would, but I imagine that those exceptions would have to be for somebody that is quite exceptional, right? So it's probably not, I wouldn't advise that individuals, that are looking for entry level roles are applying for out of country, roles where they're specifically stating they want somebody in country, right? Because that is a big hurdle that you're going to have to overcome, that the studio is going to have to overcome. There's a lot of time, complexity, and cost associated with that. And that's probably most likely going to be extended to, um, really seasoned kind of rock star top performers.
So next question. 9L asks, do you think newbies in game dev, both technical or creative, have to put in their time with less fulfilling starting jobs before getting jobs in companies they would want to work with? Example, Clever Endeavour.
I mean, I really hope not. It depends on the job description again, right? Or the job type. Like right now, we're at the place where we don't want to hire well, even then, I was gonna say we don't want to hire a a person, a junior designer, but the reality is that that is still an option to us if that junior designer, let's say they're straight out of school, but they've worked on a bunch of projects, both in school and, hobbyist projects and things like that. So in that case, like that person wouldn't have to quote unquote put in their time working in some position they don't want, um, if the portfolio is good enough. But we we do and will continue to try to have our jobs be open enough to beginners, quote unquote, or people without professional experience in the industry, if we can. If we bring someone in, if we bring a producer in the future who has, because we're like, hey, we need a producer with a bunch of game production experience who can help us to figure our stuff out, then we're not going to be able to train that person up to be the person we want them to be. Like we're expecting them to come in with that knowledge. But so far we haven't asked for a ton of experience in really any position. So yeah, I mean, I really hope that people can look for, people can get into um, jobs that they want to be doing right away. And I mean, there will always be, the junior designer on a team of 30 people is not going to be doing the thing that the senior designer is doing. And I understand that, and that's just kind of part of how it is, like that they give you those responsibilities based on your experience. But there are some studios that do internships as well, where they do paid internships when people are in school, and then as soon as they're out of school, they've already worked with this company for, two co-op sections of 6 months or something, and they're basically an employee there. So they just hire them, and they're already experienced coming straight out of school, and they have experience in that studio. We haven't gone that route. I think we're a little small for that, but there are ways.
Cool. Good answer. Next question comes from Liam. I'd really love to know a bit about how you went about defining your design process as you grew your team. It's been one of the main areas we've still nailing down at the moment. Your insight would be very valuable.
So Liam is a head of a studio himself.
Okay. Good question. I wish I had a good answer for you. I don't. Um, it, our design process has evolved quite a bit. I mean, on Ultimate Chicken Horse, because it came from a game jam, there was a pretty clear core concept, and all of our design decisions were sort of problem solving, knowing that we're aiming for that same core concept. But I can tell you, we spent a lot of time prototyping new ideas and not choosing one, and it was quite a difficult, um, some of 2020 and 2021 trying to figure that out. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that. I'm sorry. We were struggling with it for a while, and we ended up choosing a project. But we're gonna have to look back at that process again and see, okay, what went wrong and what went right in this.
You know what? That's fair. You know, like I
Yeah,
think it's
I don't have more to add.
the eternal
Sorry.
process of making games.
There are probably
RM.
people who can have a better answer to that. I'm just not one of them. Sorry.
RM asks, what are you looking for in portfolios from applicants? How much do you value seeing polished, completed work samples versus more detailed design breakdowns explaining your design process? And if you do look for reading to the design process, what level of detail would be appropriate?
It's a great question. Again, depends on the type of job. So, if we're looking for an artist, it's a lot easier to look at their portfolio and see what we see. If we're hiring a designer, that's obviously a lot harder. We have to download games in their portfolio and play them and know how much work was, that designer versus other people, and it's going to be much more difficult. It is much more difficult. I can give one anecdote that I really liked, where when we hired our first programmer, Ben, he had sent his portfolio or he'd sent his application, and he sent a video of himself, or a YouTube video of this thing he had created. So he had created like a voxel engine thing. It was really kind of crazy and complicated. But most importantly, in the video, he was speaking over the video and saying, "So I did this thing here, and like you can see if you do this, then this thing blows up, and like all of the voxels are connected to certain spots like this." And the fact that he was able to explain the thing he did to an average audience, that is me, who is not super technical, uh, was really great. So for me, I mean, polished completed work is cool, but at the same time, I'd rather see I'd rather see an innovative idea, like design idea, with the explanation of why, like how it came to be, with crappy art and crappy programming. If we're talking about the design job, as opposed to something that has beautiful art and beautiful programming, and that kind of muddies my ability to see the design anyway. It's like, well, I'm not hiring you for the art or the programming bits, and chances are, if it's really polished, it wasn't just one person who made it. So, um, yeah. So I would rather see more, yeah, more process and more kind of creativity and more communication. That really would be the key for me. Like if you can explain, well, even in the portfolio page, whether it's on itch or something, if you can explain like, here's this game, here's how we went about doing it, and here's why it's interesting. I think that's kind of um, more useful to me than just seeing a game that's fun to play, that's like polished and fun.
I hope that answers your question, RM. Ellen asks, what's your opinion on inclusivity in terms of mental health? It often feels like mentioning my disabilities make me less able to get a job. So sometimes I just keep that information to myself. So I feel like I have a chance. How do you think those people should be supported in the gaming industry, especially in situations of stress?
This is a fantastic question. So I'll answer the easier part first, which is the second bit about how we can support these folks. Um, what we try to do, and this has been both good and bad, but what we try to do is we're very clear about like you can take a mental health day or a mental health half day, and it's very accepted in our Discord for you to say, you know, I'm like my head is foggy. It's just a bad day. Like I'm gonna take off for the afternoon, and that is always accepted. Um, so communication about this kind of thing is the most important, and you know we're flexible enough. We're never setting deadlines that are so extremely tight that it's like if you miss this afternoon, the whole world falls apart. So by having that kind of way of working, I like to hope that we can accommodate people who can have something like, you know, a last minute need to take an afternoon off. That's okay. I want to be fine with that. I want to create a organization that can handle that. And even if it's a few days, like that should be fine, right? If we can't do that, then we're doing something wrong in terms of our um, culture and the way we work. And so far, we've never had anybody abuse this kind of thing before. We've never had it used to a huge extent either. So, you know, maybe I might have a different opinion if that was the case, but that's really how I try to see it. The more difficult question is you talked about mentioning your disabilities, making it harder to get a job. That's really something I don't think I can answer. I would try to get advice from potentially other folks with disabilities who have had some more experience in that. You know, obviously, if I'm reading through and someone mentions a disability, I'm going to try my absolute best to not take any points off for them. Um, and like, of course, that is my way of thinking and being. Is everybody like that? Surely not. Am I actually able to do that perfectly?
Right.
Also, probably not. And I admit that. But that's why I'm not sure how to give advice. You know, I try to fight actively against all of the biases that exist that I have. Um, but I don't really know for the actual, you know, best way to go about that.
Yeah,
Um,
even the subconscious
that's hard.
bias, right? Even the subconscious bias, can creep in there, and even if you're, think that you're doing, the right thing, you may not be aware that that's, kind of primed you or pushed you towards a different decision or feeling.
Yeah, and you know, ideally, we get to a place where you should be able to mention them without any problem, without any risk of a problem. Whether that's idealist at this point, I would say it might be. But again, I would turn to someone who has more direct experience for that.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those things where it can come across in other ways too. Just being your authentic self, right? Authentically you in your application, in your resume. I have friends that put things in their resume where I basically tell them like it's nothing about kind of mental health issues or disability. It's just then inserting their personality, and I say this is great if you don't absolutely need this job, right? If you're gainfully employed, you put those things out there and you say this is who I am, and I want somebody that's really going to really embrace who I am and my personality and my needs. And then when you find teams that vibe with that, then that's fantastic. That's great. It might actually be one of the reasons that they reach out to you and want to hire you.
Hmm.
But in moments of desperation where you've got to pay those bills, right? Those are scenarios where I suggest that we might want to hold some of that, personality back. Um,
I would also
Ideally,
say,
yeah, go ahead,
sorry,
Richard.
just tiny thing. I would also say like that has come up in the past where it hasn't been mentioned, and then later on, once they're working, it has been mentioned. And I've never held that against someone. I've been like, why didn't you tell me this before? Like that would be so, I don't know, such a like horrible human thing to do.
Yeah,
So
it's also
yeah,
something that's
so
like from a legal standpoint, we can't ask those questions as employers, right?
for
So
sure.
that's not
Yeah.
information that actually we should be able to ask of you because that can then influence a hiring decision, and then that's some form of discrimination, right? So that would then suggest that's information that you may want to hold closer to the vest. But again, you also then ideally are looking for companies, for employers that are really going to fully embrace who you are and everything about you. So
Hmm.
like Richard said, we're probably not the people to answer that question, seek out other advice. I think there's strong reasons for and against. RM asks about your application. There's actually a bullet point: experience working with tools for narrative. What narrative tools are you looking for?
I don't know. We
Okay.
haven't actually used any. So Ultimate Chicken Horse didn't have anything in the way of narrative. And this new project, we haven't gotten into using anything too specific, like integrating stuff directly into Unity yet. There's much more narrative in this game, much more of a narrative focus in this game. But we haven't actually explored that yet. And so Elizabeth, our operations manager, is also the narrative person, lead narrative, and they come from a different industry as well. So it's going to be a discussion with our programmer and with her to think about how to go about that. So the answer is I haven't looked at any narrative tools. So yeah.
All right,
So
we are
it
actually
opens up, right? It opens up the possibility of like impress Richard with all of this knowledge about narrative tools.
that's one of those you spoke at the beginning of this conversation about somebody identifying opportunities for improvement, right?
Yeah,
Saying, hey, you're doing great, but here's some opportunities for improvement. Here's an area that you can actually influence. Right? All right, we
I had a
are
few.
Richard, we're at
Sorry,
11.
yeah,
Do you still have some time?
yeah, I do.
Great.
I was going to say I have a few notes that I wrote down just as I was looking through applications that I thought I could share just at some point. So I don't know if that time is now
Hey,
or not.
what have you seen? What trends have you seen, or themes have you seen out of your recent applications that are good and bad that you might want to point out?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so we haven't dug super deep into portfolios. We've done a kind of first pass of like cover letters and CVs. Lots of students or people who are just graduating. That was certainly the majority. Not a lot of women, or at least from what I assume based on names that I've read. There are many names that I don't know what gender they might identify with, but there are certainly many names where I assume that they're male, and has definitely been the majority, which is well, much more than the majority. That has been like a ridiculous majority. So that's not ideal. Um, and we've tried to post the job in as many places as possible that were groups like Pixels or like DMG, Dames Make Games Toronto, things like that. Yeah, I'm not really sure why we haven't gotten this wider diversity of applicants in terms of gender, but that's something we've noticed. What else was there? There's a fair bit of like programmers applying for the design job, and generally those folks are going to be like, it's good to have the code knowledge, but ideally we would want somebody who studied design and knows how to code a little bit, as opposed to someone who studied computer science and also wants to do design. Yeah, I'm not really sure in terms of like other trends. Um, yeah, I don't know.
What in reviewing some of your applications, what have you seen so far? Again, both good and bad that have really kind of stood out to you. So what's led to you talk about some of the kind of throwaway applications. What are some common themes there? And then what are one or two applications that really stood out to you and why?
Some of the more kind of throwaway ones, usually that's just based on a CV where a person has like, experience in, uh, they were working in like a cashier job somewhere, and they were working in a restaurant somewhere, um, and they studied, let's say, computer science, but then in their cover letter, there's nothing about why they like are interested in games or why they think that they could be good in design and things like that. So and even on the CV, there's no talk of like any sort of volunteer or hobby experience in games. So I'm kind of
Yeah,
like, I don't really know why. I mean, that to me speaks of someone who probably is just like, I like video games and I studied programming, so maybe this is a job I could get.
Right. So actually,
And
let's stay here for a second. So you're not saying that like restaurant experience is actually a negative. You're saying that it's it's non-relevant experience without showing any relevant experience in your own time in volunteer or project work.
yeah, and I would say it is relevant experience in that, if you've worked in sales or you've worked at a restaurant, wait staff or bus staff, like you know what it means to work in an environment that is fast-paced and crazy, and like ours won't be
Absolutely.
that crazy no matter what it is. So that's actually a big plus if you have this
Yeah.
kind of experience. So I like to see people's experience, even if it seems like it's completely irrelevant, because um, it it gives us stuff to talk about in an interview also, and there's definitely stuff that can be drawn on from pretty much any of this experience. One thing I actually find is a bit of a turn off is if all of someone's experience is in a very specific thing. So in this case, it's a bit different because game design, we are looking for someone with experience in design, but we've gotten a few kind of programmer applications who have a ton of experience in like AI and like AR stuff and like I don't know, like complex linear algebra stuff in computing and, advanced mathematics. And in their hobbies, they talk about like mathematics and computer science stuff. And I'm like, well, this is coming across as very one-dimensional. And I'm sure the actual person isn't one-dimensional, but I'd like to see a little more, what else, what else is there that's
Mhm.
there, especially when it's not related to, when most of their portfolio is not about, or most of their application is not about game design.
Right.
Um,
So what are some of the positive themes that really stand out to you?
so we haven't looked at portfolios yet, but there are definitely a good number of people who are, straight out of school, but they have they have a big capstone project, like end of school project, and they also have a game they made with a friend, and they also have this thing they developed on their own, and they also had this hobby thing that they made. And then so I'm seeing like 8 games that somebody made or somebody
Mhm.
was involved in making. And no, I haven't played them yet, but that's kind of a big plus in my mind because I see that and I'm like, oh, so it doesn't really matter if you don't have that actual work experience in a studio, or it might not matter if you have some experience that shows you can work with people. Um,
Yep.
that restaurant experience plus those things in straight out of school, I that's certainly just as good as, or can be just as good as someone who has the design experience in a studio. So I've seen a few of those, which I'm pretty excited to dig into.
Yeah, I like that. It's the unrelated job, right? It's the restaurant experience. It's the Starbucks barista. Um, that's great experience, especially if you show like growth, right, and progression, in those roles. If you're a top performer, if you're a great employee at any role, that shows us that you have the capability of being a great employee, right? And those are the things that we want you to be on our teams. So you couple that with, somebody who's really obviously then interested and passionate about games that are going out of their way to involve themselves and learn and be curious. And then, like you said, when you're working on a game jam, like it's somebody actually that knows how to work with a team, like work in a team to bring a game, to fruition and put a game out there in the world, right? Those are really good skills that you're going to need on this team. So those are both kind of verifying that you would check those boxes, right, and gives us a lot more confidence to give you a call as a potential hiring manager.